Well, good morning, everyone. Today I thought I would take a little bit of a different tack than what we've been doing. We certainly have learned a lot, and we've learned a lot about things that many of us didn't know anything about. But today I thought I would do a presentation on one of the seminal figures in African American history. So who am I? A lot of this is for the benefit of my white colleagues on the call. And why? Because I know we don't know a lot about him because we often mispronounce his name. He was the first African American to earn a PhD from Harvard and still had to be off the campus by 6 p.m. I tried to verify it, and I suspect very strongly that old Cambridge at the time was a sundown town. So all African Americans had to be out of there by the time the sun went down, which was standardized to be 6 p.m. in the evening. He was a co-founder of the Niagara Movement, which was a group of intellectuals dedicated to obtaining full political, social, and civil rights for African Americans, and was a forerunner to the NAACP. The Niagara Movement is something else I know I never heard of in any history class that I took going through school. And you think, they must have had views that the white majority disagreed with, which they certainly did. Does anyone know who he is?
Not a clue.
Not a clue.
This for the white people or for everyone?
Well, now I put it on the screen, but I think you probably knew, Denise, huh?
How about Du Bois?
W.B. Du Bois.
Yes, Du Bois, right. You do pronounce the S. So we know his name, but why weren't we taught anything about him? One reason was that his views ran contrary to the prevailing narrative about Blacks in America, which we saw very clearly when we watched Cheryl's presentation yesterday about Jim Crow laws and looked at the artifacts in that museum. Certainly the way that Du Bois the way he thought and the views that he had, his writings all went contrary to that depiction of Blacks in America. He also challenged the views of Booker T. Washington, which was someone we did learn about in school, partly because Washington promoted the doctrine of assimilation and technical training as opposed to liberal arts education for African Americans in the United States. Du Bois was also sometimes called the father of Pan-Africanism. Pan-Africanism is still a worldwide movement that aims to encourage and strengthen bonds of solidarity between all indigenous and diaspora ethnic groups of African descent. At its beginning, which was around the turn of the 20th century, its beginning was distinctly political, and the group was assembled to, quote, protest stealing of lands in the colonies, racial discrimination, and to deal with other issues of interest to Blacks. So I have a short video, it's 5 minutes. Hopefully I can get this to work. And I think you'll find it very enlightening. When we come back, I have a little bit to say about the academic and intellectual work that Du Bois did, which is extremely relevant today. And I will share a link to an article, an op-ed piece that appeared in the Times about his writing, which I think you'll find very interesting, has to do with critical race theory. So I'm going to stop sharing this, and I am going to hope to share this video. Did that work?
Yes, you're good.
I'm good. I apologize. I have two screens, and so that's very confusing for me.
Du Bois was one of the most influential African-American thinkers of the 20th century.
Did I share
What
the sound?
topics did Du Bois care about?
Yes.
Okay.
What was his overall influence on the African-American culture? William Edward Burghardt Du Bois was born in Great Barrington, Massachusetts on February 23rd, 1868. As a young man, he decided to attend Fisk College in Nashville, Tennessee. He was able to attend through generous donations from his local church, as well as support from neighbors. It was during college that he experienced segregation enforced by law for the first time. After earning a bachelor's degree from Fisk, he enrolled at Harvard. He worked his way through 3 years of attending Harvard, paying for school with loans from friends, scholarships, and summer jobs. He earned a second bachelor's degree in 1891, and in 1895, Du Bois became the first African American to receive a PhD from Harvard University. Early in his career, he taught at Wilberforce University, the University of Pennsylvania, and Atlanta University. He published his first important study in 1899. It was titled The Philadelphia Negro. This was considered a breakthrough accomplishment because it was the first scientific sociological study done in the United States. As the new century began, Du Bois became involved in the Pan-African movement. This was a movement which encouraged solidarity for Africans around the world. He became an influential part of the first Pan-African Conference in London and drafted a letter to the world. In this letter, he encouraged nations to fight against racism and grant political rights to those of African ancestry. He also encouraged self-governance of the European colonies in Africa. Du Bois became a well-known critic of Booker T. Washington. Washington believed that African Americans should accept segregation in exchange for vocational training and other basic educational opportunities. Du Bois adamantly disagreed with this position, arguing that Blacks should fight for equal rights. Through his writings and published papers, Du Bois popularized the term the talented tenth. This referred to the 1/10 of African Americans that would eventually become the leaders of the race, a position they could only achieve by continuing their education, writing books, and becoming involved in social change. Du Bois became an influential and successful writer. His most important work was The Souls of Black Folk, which has been praised as being nearly as important to the African American community as Uncle Tom's Cabin. Du Bois helped co-found the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, the NAACP. His primary task with the NAACP was to edit the organization's monthly publication, The Crisis. Du Bois wrote many articles for The Crisis, and it became incredibly popular under his guidance. The publication by the year 1920. Throughout the 1920s, Du Bois clashed with Marcus Garvey, a leading intellectual who was originally from Jamaica. Garvey preached a message of Africa for Africans and believed that African Americans should work towards complete separation rather than attempting to integrate. Du Bois disagreed with this strategy and referred to Garvey as reckless and fraudulent. Du Bois was initially a supporter of the Harlem Renaissance. He actively promoted the creative efforts of African American artists. He even published an article in The Crisis titled A Negro Art Renaissance. However, as the 1920s progressed, he became discouraged that not enough artists and musicians were using their talents to promote the African American cause. Du Bois continued to fight for African American rights throughout the remainder of his life. He died on August 27, 1963, at the age of 95, while living in Ghana, Africa. Today, he is remembered as one of the most influential African American philosophers of the 20th century. His birth home in Massachusetts is registered as a historical landmark, and his life and career has been honored in many different ways.
So this is the video that we just saw. And what I really wanted to point out, and what I think makes him so important, and why I wanted to talk about him today, is because he was a historian, as we learned, and he believed in taking to the study and writing of history. In the concluding chapter of his book, Black Reconstruction, called The Propaganda of History, this chapter is a strongly critical and controversial essay on the uses and abuses of historical narrative, as well as a heated attack on the mainstream of American history writing as it existed in the 20s and 30s, when Du Bois' book was conceived, researched, and written. And this was also the time when the South was erecting all those monuments to the Confederacy and the Lost Cause, and trying to keep that story alive. And so you probably have read what is on the screen, that in order to paint the South as the martyr and the North as the emancipator, they ended up ridiculing the Negro as an impossible joke in the whole development. 50 years of libel, innuendo, and silence so completely misstated and obliterated the history of the Negro in America and his relation to its work and government that it's almost unknown. He goes on to say that white people have been saying we must forget that George Washington was a slave owner or that Thomas Jefferson had mulatto children, and simply remember the things we regard as credible and inspiring. The difficulty with this approach, he continues, is that history loses its value and incentive and example. It paints perfect men and noble nations, but it does not tell the truth. And there's been a lot of discussion about that lately, and certainly a lot of controversy, and it's coming up by school boards all around the country and in how we educate our children. There's a link to the Times article that talks about Du Bois and his views and his work. It's written by an African-American. It's a fabulous, I hope everyone can get to it. I think it's a free article, you'll have to see. But in the end, the person who wrote the article feels that the conservatives are losing ground and that eventually thinking will be more enlightened and will feel more about learning history the way Du Bois has instructed us to. So I want to end, this is a Henry Louis Gates 2 Minutes of Black History video. I know Cheryl has mentioned them. We've seen a couple. If you do go to that website, which I think might be called Black History Monday, there's a lot of them on that site in any case. You'll see that it's very disheartening. Many of them are portrayals of horrible events in history, but this one is a happy one, and I think you'll enjoy seeing it. Hold on, here we go. Let's see where it went. Here it is.
Exposition, one exhibit stood out among the rest. The exhibit of American Negroes displayed more than 350 photographs of African Americans to challenge racist stereotypes and display Black social and economic achievement in a way the world had never seen before. The exhibit was compiled by one W.E.B. Du Bois. A pioneer in the fields of history and sociology, Dr. Du Bois was a well-known author and activist. He'd been illuminating the Black experience through his research and writing when he was asked to help curate an exhibit on African Americans at the Paris Exposition, an international World's Fair organized to celebrate the start of the new century.
Du Bois automatically recognizes that photography needs to be playing a prominent role in recasting how African Americans are perceived on this global stage.
He put together a remarkable exhibit using photographic representation to demonstrate the progress of the race, but also the beauty of the race.
Du Bois was highly educated, deeply cosmopolitan, and thoroughly middle class. He highlighted these same qualities, the qualities of the so-called New Negro, in the portraits he curated. In addition to more than 300 photographs, Du Bois also displayed dozens of charts and drawings, illustrating the social and economic status of African Americans. Du Bois demonstrated that African Americans were dignified, respectable human beings.
The exhibition confronted stereotypes, offering alternatives to things like minstrelsy, and offered a different perspective of what Black life was like.
More than 45 million people visited the show. The remarkable portraits and data visualizations would help globalize the New Negro movement, part of an attempt by African Americans to counter the negative racial imagery of Black people called upon to justify Jim Crow segregation. Energized by his triumph in Paris, Du Bois would go on to write his most famous book, The Souls of Black Folk, laid the foundation for the Niagara movement in 1905, and helped create the NAACP in 1909, making him one of the greatest intellectuals in American history and a hero for all time.
Oh, sorry. So I'm sorry, did you not see that?
Yeah, it was there.
Oh, okay.
I saw it.
All right. Well, that was my presentation on Black history. I hope some of you were able to learn something about Du Bois that you didn't know before. He's really a remarkable person, and certainly his writing deserves to be read today as much as it did at the time that he wrote it.
Thank you, Susan. That
Thanks,
was
Susan.
good.
Thank you,
add,
Susan. Thanks a
Susan?
lot, Susan.
Can I add something?
And
Can I
his
add
rest,
something?
his resting place is in Accra, Ghana, and I visited the museum a couple of times
I
in
know.
Ghana.
Yes,
Yes.
he moved there at the
and-
end of his life. I think he was becoming a little disillusioned.
And
He
I would
was
like to add
invited
something.
there. Oh, go ahead.
I would like to add something that Du Bois' father, Alfred Du Bois, was born in Haiti.
Oh, really?
Alfred Du Bois, that Du Bois' father, he was born in Haiti.
Hmm. Well, I'm sure that history influenced a lot of his thinking as well.
It could be.
Could be.
Yes.
All right, everyone. Well, have a good day and thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you, Susan.
Thank you, Susan.